All right, I'm going to show you all what I had to do to install an Aeromotive 340 fuel pump into an 87 or 86 Pontiac Grand Prix G-body. Okay, first of all, this is the sending unit from an 87 Buick Grand National, or for a Monte Carlo with a 4.3 with fuel injection. The only difference is there's going to be one extra pipe here on the end of this. A lot of things to cover on this. First of all, this end of this line, metal line, looks more like this one. What you have to do is cut off that barb on the end, because it's just rubber hoses that hook to this. And this is only if you want to run an AN fitting or AN line on this setup. You don't have to do this, but it's something I'm going with just because it'll make me sleep better at night. Okay, so I used one of those pipe cutoff or a brake line cutoff tool and cut this to the right length. You may have to try it a couple times. I didn't get it cut short enough, and I say that because I'm using one of these Aeroquip adapter fit, or is it Aeroquip or Earls? Either way, I'm going to put a link down at the bottom later on for this, so you can buy these. But anyways, you cut this to the correct length, and then you lube it up a little bit. Make sure there's no sharp edges on the end of this. Make sure you ain't got no burrs on the inside. Nothing's going to cut the rubber O-ring that's in the inside of this. And you slip this on. Okay, once you've got that pressed on, then you use this U-shaped looking thread backing nut. Goes over top of your line and screws in. Of course, after you drop it on the floor, it threads into the back of the fitting, just like so. You'll tighten that down, and so now we have the fittings for the feed line and the return line. Okay, now that that's done, we'll talk about the next issue, which is, if anybody has noticed, I have put these fittings on the wrong lines, and I did that on purpose. This is the feed line, this big one. The 5/16 line, which is typically the return line, especially for GM, is actually the vent line for the factory Monte Carlo or Grand National. So this little fitting here, or this little vent, is actually plugged into the back of this right here. It's pushed in there. Now mine, as soon as I got it out of the box, this thing never vented correctly, and as it turned out, there's a bunch of junk in here. I don't know how it got in here. I'm sure this thing comes from some other country where they can't even say fitting. But so I pulled this out and found all the trash in here and blew it out. So this thing should work correctly. However, now this is my return. So I'm putting a hose on here. This is just an extra piece of rubber hose I had. I'm going to put it on. All right, I had to find a longer piece of hose, but I cut this hose the same length as the factory return tube, this long one right here. Now the reason that goes so deep into the tank is that way the fuel, you don't have this hot fuel splashing and evaporating on top of the tank. Pretty much. I mean, it's to help get that fuel back down underneath the existing fuel in the tank. So that's why that's important to have that long hose or tube, and it doesn't matter which you put on there. I hope pretty sure this hose I used was rated for alcohol. I don't know. Anyways, so this here, to take place of this, I'm not going to reuse this. Now this tube here has to become my vent line, and I wasn't sure how it was going to work with fuel or air trying to escape from here. I didn't think it was going to work very well. So I actually drilled a hole in that tube right up here, and that will be my vent. So that makes this small hose right here my vent line now, instead of a return. So I believe I've got this correct. All right. Now for the Aeromotive pump. If you've got this far, chances are you've already put in fuel pumps before. I'm not really showing you anything new. Pretty simple setup. I'm using the 11540 fuel pump. They've got several different ones, and I think the big differences are where the inlet and the inlet and the outlet are located on the pump housing. They could be center or they can be offset to one side. I chose the center. It didn't matter to me. I was going to make it work. You have to take your factory wiring and cut it and then splice it one way or another. I don't know how you do it. So you can use the Aeromotive plug-in and wiring. And it's a pretty big plug-in. Wiring's not really any bigger. It's just the plug-in itself is bigger. I'm not really sure why they did that. They could have just made it to where any factory connector would have worked, but whatever. It's Aeromotive. So I use this piece of foam thing here. I'm not even really sure what it's for anymore. Put on their sock. It is bigger. The whole inlet here is bigger. So you will be using that. And you use their hose. You want to use their hose. Okay, well, I already had one of their hoses on here, so that's the route I took there. And their hose, I'm just setting it off to the side. This one was already the right length. And so now there's an Aeromotive 340 fuel pump on a factory Buick Grand National sending unit. So that's really all there was to it. The hard part was getting the fittings lined out and getting the hoses and wiring figured out. The fuel pumps are, you take your old one off, put the new one on, or if you did what I did, you went and bought the sending unit to switch it over to fuel injection, and you just put a fuel pump on it. I think companies like Racetronics, I think already sell this setup ready to go. You might want to look at their website, but that was that. Okay. And then the wiring I've already covered in another video, a fuel pump video, or a fuel system video. Basically, doesn't really matter how you do it other than this wiring from the factory sending unit. I believe it's a factory deal. Yeah. Now I may have put this connector on, but anyways, you hook your gray wire up to whatever, your power wire from your relay or straight to the battery or toggle switch or whatever you're doing. Black one is ground, and then the purple one actually is for the sending unit itself. That tells you how much fuel's in the tank, and I just spliced the factory wire in to use the factory fuel gauge, and it works quite well. So I was pretty happy with that. So okay, moving on. We'll get to putting the rest of the car together, and I'll cover more of that later. Thanks for watching.